When you add images to your site, you should also add some text for screen readers, which then reads out that text. But does every image really need alt text, or can it be left empty? What about decorative images? How can you tell when an image is actually decorative? Right off the bat, I want to highlight this LinkedIn post that sort of encompasses the issue of when we had to use images for actual decorative components like box shadows and rounded corners and spacers. And the post says, in hindsight, it created unnecessary misunderstandings to call pure decoration images decorative in the WAI image tutorials. Pure decoration in WCAG means there's no other use case but decoration for the image. It comes from a time when we had to use images for box shadows and rounded corners. Most of the decorative images today are not pure decoration and hence should have at least simple alternative text. And then it goes on to say, I regret the error. So that sort of prompted me to do a little bit of investigation into, is there an updated definition for what could be considered a decorative image? There are still scenarios that are really kind of a gray area in this. And so even though most of the time your images aren't decorative, maybe there were still some instances where it could be left out. So there's always going to be different opinions on the best method for alt text, when to add it, how long it should be, what should be included. Writing alt text is as much a skill as writing the website content itself. You can take the context into consideration and describe the image by pulling out the important parts and keeping it as short as it can be while providing enough information. So, questions to ask yourself: why did you add the image? What would a sighted person be getting from this image in relation to the content? You just do the best you can. Some screen reader users want as little alt text as possible, the shorter the better, and as many empty alts as possible. They don't want to even know there are images in there. They can't see them. They don't care. Others want to at least know what's there. And most of the time, it seems, at least the consensus is to not make it longer than it needs to be. At least with alt text of the proper length, someone can skip past it. The key is to give your website visitor the choice to listen or skip it, instead of removing the option completely with an empty alt, or worse, no alt at all. Not every situation is straightforward or answering with a yes or no. For example, there are these scrapbook type layouts that have a dozen little icons and graphics sprinkled around that make up the overall section's design. For instance, a hero area. Even if they all have a short single word or few word description, someone is going to have to get through all of those images to get past that section, or just bypass all the images completely and risk missing out on something that could potentially have some kind of value. So what's the best way to approach the alt text in that case so that someone has the idea of what's being done without having to go through each image individually? Ideally, this would all be in one image styled in the background, but if some kind of layout or other reason calls for these individually placed images, it might make sense to use an empty alt on all of them except maybe the first one that describes the overall vibe and points out some of the highlights, maybe the style that the images are in. Is it in classic, notebook sticker style, or is it sort of, outlined subtle images? It's all about putting thought into the experience that you're giving your website visitors. This is one of those situations where we have few different options for how to move forward, and there may not be a technically correct way to go about it. The key is to not overuse images. If you think an image doesn't need alt text, it could be a good opportunity to consider whether the image is worth adding in the first place. If you think an image is just a stock image and it doesn't need to be described because it's just filler, well, that begs the question of, why is it being added in the first place? This could be an opportunity to streamline your overall approach to images in the first place. Rather than stuffing a design with images to try to break things up, you can use the design itself. Use whitespace, typography, colors, headings, and these elusive decorative elements. So the images that do get added are done so purposefully as images themselves, not background or ambiance. But that means that there are situations when images might be added for visual interest only, right? Do those need a description? And that's where our initial question comes into play. Are there still images that are decorative? The definition of a decorative image has evolved over time to try to discern whether that image is actually decorative versus when it has some kind of purpose. What visual users might consider decorative is still contributing to the overall feel of the website. Screen reader users might still want the opportunity to understand the tone of the content and the website, and those additional elements contribute to that. There's a second LinkedIn post that actually goes into this idea of giving website visitors the opportunity to experience your entire website as a whole. It reads, your decorative images probably aren't decorative at all. Images are used for all kinds of reasons: to draw attention, explain a concept, add atmosphere, you name it. For people unable to perceive those images, we can add alternative text that describe the images. This enables screen readers to read out that description and inform the user on what the image is about. And one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to the interpretation of the relevant success criterion number 1.1.1 non-text content, as a sidebar, that's just a WCAG guideline. It's the frequently unjust usage of the decorative image idea. It's an author judgment question for each image used. And the main question to ask yourself is, does this image add information to the page? And you're going to quickly find that the answer to this question is yes. Yes, it does. Decorative images could be something that's used as a border or a spacer, but these use cases have generally gone out of practice with modern day CSS. Images that add to a properly labeled link or button can be considered decorative as well. And there are situations where the information on the image is already conveyed in the regular text. An image that helps set the scene or convey a feeling you want your page to evoke, that's not a decorative image. And thinking it only adds a tiny bit isn't a valid reason to mark it decorative either. You choose that image for a reason. It has significance. Try to think of what you would miss if you could not see the images and word that into your text alternatives. There are other ways to convey a website style through things like writing and style and tone, the way images are used, the types of pages that you include on your site, and so on. So if someone isn't able to experience the design of the website, the colors and other visual elements, is adding alt text to a decorative element enhancing the experience, or is it creating additional barriers or obstacles to have to get through? It could be something that helps someone who is navigating using a screen reader and can see some of the elements on the page. So describing these decorative images could help them fully understand what's on the page as they're tabbing through, instead of skipping over parts that seem like they should be read out but aren't. At the risk of adding too much clutter, it would be best to land on the side of caution when describing these purely decorative elements that get added to the page. Things like swirls, patterns, little semi-transparent illustrations, and other similar things that truly are design elements and not adding anything to the page. It's going to probably, unfortunately, be a case-by-case basis, because you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to list out, 13 decorative elements that are on the page. That starts to get tiresome after a while. So when it comes to these design elements that feel like they're decorative, I think it's going to have to depend on your website that you are building. Surely it still sometimes makes sense to have an image bypass, right? When should an image have empty alt text definitively, besides these is it decorative situations? If describing the image would result in repetitive text, this was again alluded to in that LinkedIn post. So for example, if a restaurant has their menu items listed with an accompanying image of that thing that they're offering you to eat, that image is most likely going to show exactly what's in the description of the dish. You don't need to have somebody read out, here's the dish and what's in it, and then here's an image of the dish and what's in it. That's repetitive. So unless the image has some kind of different take on it, like the owner of the restaurant is making this special dish which is conveying something specific about it, or the chef or the restaurant, that alt should probably be left empty. If it's an icon that accompanies some kind of text, especially when it's in a link. So for example, you don't need to describe the silhouette icon that's next to the words your account. Just leave that empty. If it's just the icon, I would push to have also the text there. But if for some reason that is not an option, you're going to want to describe that icon. And if it's a link, describe where the link goes. And also there's that sort of stylized text that's already in the content. A lot of times this happens for featured images in blog feeds. Featured images will sometimes be like a designed version of the blog post title, and then the title will be written below that. You can leave that blank because, again, it's just going to read out the blog post text. But if it's got different text in it, like adds some extra info or words something differently, you're probably going to want to add that as some alt text, even if it's just similar. Or if it has some other information like a person in it pointing to stuff or other things in it, that's additional context to provide. So maybe you don't need to repeat the title of the blog post, but you mention those other things that are in that image. A lot of this is really dependent on your site, the types of images you're using, and so it's all going to just depend. And that's why, like I said, writing alt text should be considered a skill in itself, just like writing website content. A lot of times background images are considered something that you don't need to describe because it's in the background. But just because it's in the background doesn't automatically make it decorative. With the way that websites are optimized from a code standpoint, it tends to be better to have your background images loaded on the page itself as regular images and then styled so that it's in the background, rather than setting that background image in the style sheet. So if that's the best way to add your images to the page, that then also gives you the opportunity to describe those images in that alt text. So what are you using in the background? Is it an aerial shot of the location? Is it team members working together? What's the purpose of this image? It is something that is adding something to the page, and you should be providing that context. As with most things, don't let the fear of getting it wrong keep you from doing it at all. Use this to help inform your future decisions about alt text and how you use images on your website. You can only get better with practice. Describe your images on your website, on social media, anywhere you can. Ask for feedback. Have people test out your site and just do your best.